I have been asked today to speak on the topic of suppressing and repressing corruption and state capture in aid of development. So I put my own title to it, A Few Good Men. Opening credits, A Few Good Men. I will state my purpose right away. I call for a constitutional reformation and a reimagination of our collective mindsets in the fight against corruption and state capture in aid of national development. That is my thesis. That is my conclusion. But as if in a flashback, I will now attempt to work my way backwards to my conclusion. So you already know what I'm going to say. Let me quickly point out, though, that I do not pretend to propound an elixir in the fight against corruption. Indeed, I doubt if any exists. I do not have any definite answers. I wish I had. I am much the poorer in this regard. Here I am to tell you a bit of what I have encountered in the fight against corruption. It seems to me that as it stands, there are only a few good men among us. Hopefully, the pieces I share today will spur us on collectively to comprehensively suppress and repress corruption and state capture. I have shared some of what I say today in the past, but they bear repeating. Professor, I'm a reluctant occupier of the position of the special prosecutor, in the sense that I neither asked for this position, nor did I lobby for it. I'm not inclined to recount how I got to sit in this seat, except to say that the position was laid on my head. Sacrificially, I eventually accepted the position after several weeks of prompting. I allude to sacrifice because the acceptance of the job required me to drastically change my lifestyle and my life as I knew it. Not that I was engaged in some opprobrious vocation or habit, not in the least, but that I was a fun-loving and outdoorsy reveling type, being an elite worker. I cannot do anymore most of the things which bore a meaning to my life, in my estimation, because the job requires so. The job demands so. That is one aspect of the sacrifice. Purely private quests, you would say. The other aspect of the sacrifice is impersonal. That is that the position of the special prosecutor is a very thankless job. It fetches you droves of enemies daily, and it brings you into frontal contact with the lowest forms of debasement in humans. You do not go asking for it. It finds you. That is the nature of the job. Everyone wants the special prosecutor to do his job, yet no one wants the special prosecutor to do his job. It all depends on the subject of the investigation. This paradoxical predicament is perhaps an index of the human condition, which is that though we accept that we need to rein in corruption, yet no one wants to yield freely to scrutiny. No one happily accedes to indictment. No one welcomes investigations. No one wants to be called out as suspected of engaging in corruption and corruption-related activities. And so, there is always a strong pushback intended at deflecting the focus of scrutiny and accountability. The pushback is reflected in so many forms, including the sponsorship of attacks and vile publications against the special prosecutor and the Office of the Special Prosecutor, OSP. Sadly, some of the enemies the job attracts would not hesitate to take a life should opportunity present itself. Thus, my security risk is ultra high, and I have to perpetually be on the lookout for attacks on my person. Same applies to especially the operational officers of the OSP. Such is the volatility in which the fight against corruption is being waged in our nation. And the only fine hour of the job is the hope that one is helping to build a just and fair society. One only hopes that it is not a hopeless sort of hope, and that it is a hopeful sort of hope. This perhaps accounts for the realism of only a few good men in the space, as I see it. In the ordinary circumstances of mankind, not many persons would offer their services and expend their energies in such a charged environment. The fight against corruption demands immense sacrifice from us all. It requires purging oneself of reproach first, and then forming a containment ring of communal reckoning, of not having a choice about it, but to keep suppressing and repressing such acts. It is upon this aspiration I proceed further. Part 1. The usual suspects: corruption and state capture. Corruption is as old as time itself. If you put any premium on the creation story in the Bible, then it will seem that from the moment Eve allowed herself to be beguiled by the serpent, which precipitated the fall of man from grace, the human situation has been forged negatively in corruption. I have always wondered how the serpents procured the guileful information about the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Who passed the information to the serpent, and for what purpose? And what was in it for the serpent? What did he stand to gain from that venture? The serpent certainly got a just desert afterwards by being forever consecrated to go about on his belly. Though we are not told, it seems to me that the serpent did not act alone. Do you think? It appeared certainly to be in cahoots with others. It was a masterfully calculated act. It must have been set to it by co-conspirators who wanted to assure the fall of man. Again, it seems to me that the first case of delict, which attracted opprobrious sanctions, had corruption written all over it. In the past 26 years or so, the fight against corruption has engaged global attention on almost the same scale as the human rights drive which preceded it. Now we're a bit quiet on human rights, aren't we? Now we are very vociferous on corruption. From the applaudable efforts by Transparency International, which took it upon itself to fight global corruption through the augmentation of the fight by other international organizations, notably the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, further through the adoption of national policies, laws, and regulations by states, to the involvement of civil society and corporate bodies. The fight against corruption is presently the universal bride. Perhaps we cannot describe the melee of corruption better than as captured by our own Kofi Annan in his foreword on the General Assembly resolution adopting the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I like to repeat this quote. Doesn't like my left hand. Corruption is an insidious plague that has a wide range of corrosive effects on societies. It undermines democracy and the rule of law. It leads to violations of human rights. It distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. We would agree with our departed brother Kofi Annan, and much energy and scholarship have been expended on the challenges confronting the fight against corruption. I have no intention of boring you with an enumeration of these well-known and oft-lamented difficulties. We know them all so well, and they play out so debilitatingly in the politics of anti-corruption. Actually, we owe a disconsolate tribute to the challenges as a reason for the unhappy state of the fight against corruption. In my estimation, corruption begets morally opprobrious conduct. It engenders greed and individual interests. It encourages the setting aside of rules. It lowers standards in all aspects of life. The effect of corruption is all around us. Huge sums of public money that could provide social amenities to our people are funneled into private pockets. We hear stories of corruption in almost every interaction with the systems of the state. We hear talk that apparently one needs to pay a bribe to obtain some government jobs, to obtain school postings, to pass exams, to triumph in elections. Does that sound familiar? Even to obtain some state identification documents. The list is endless. In this society, which is governed by what I term pay-to-play rules, the poor and the marginalized lose out completely. The other suspect, state capture, is itself a form of corruption. It is characterized by a few interests and persons capturing the decision-making and resource allocation systems and processes of the state. In effect, the captured economy is nothing more than a reflection of the few captors who steer the nation solely for their private benefit to the woe of the aggregate national interest. The few captors become the state, and the state becomes them. The state is then reduced to merely a sort of private property. In this scheme of affairs, nothing stands in the way of the few captors, and they engage in corruption to fantastic degrees. Part 2. Disappearing acts. We know we must act. We know we have no choice. The question has been, what course do we take? And how do we stem the tide of corruption and its satellite moon, state capture? This light is very unfriendly. I can hardly see what I'm reading. It was a rather curious push against corruption that heralded our independence from colonial rule, which all came together by a conglomeration of interrelated events which commenced severally in the past and culminated in historic occurrences on one day, 9 years before independence. Thank you. Still to the... Yeah. Thank you. Right. It's better now. I can see. In the morning of Saturday, 28 February 1948, exactly 77 years to the day, members of the ex-servicemen's union, especially those in Accra, must have felt very upbeat that by the end of the day, their long drawn-out grievances against those in authority would be well received by the head of government and perhaps usher in a turnaround in their fortunes and that of the country. However, by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 had been shot dead, and more than 60 lay writhing in pain from various degrees of injury from gunshots. Their crime? They had been minded to assemble and symbolically march in a peaceful and armed procession to present a petition to the colonial governor at his official residence at the Christiansborg Castle in Osu. Upon reaching the triangular intersection of what was then Row Road, Castle Road, and Christiansborg Road, they were ordered by Superintendent Imre, a white superintendent of police in Accra. The order was simple: halt, turn, and disperse. They refused. Imre then ordered his men to open fire at the procession. His men refused. Imre, who appeared to have had some misgivings about preparations for public order that morning, as his men later recounted, carried out his own order by grabbing a rifle and shooting at the procession. The painful irony was that the ex-soldiers had survived brutal battles in the Second World War, only to be mowed down by a police officer of the empire they served for simply participating in a benign procession intended for the presentation of a petition. These events are well known and well documented. It is their contextual significance, which I will state presently, that invites me to their revisitation. Let's pause for a while. That day also held another significance. It was the day on which the boycott of European and Asian stores, which had been observed nationwide from January 1948, was to end, and the reduction in prices of certain commodities was to come into effect. Our people expected a bountiful price reduction. They were to be disappointed. The price reduction was not what they expected. It is also well documented that these events precipitated a 5-day looting and overrunning of European and Asian businesses in Accra and other towns as news of the killing of the 3 ex-soldiers spread. While the reports of the Commission of Inquiry into what was described as disturbances in the Gold Coast attributed the primary cause of the riot to the shooting incident on 28 February, the extensive testimony the Watson Commission took from our people showed that the contextual significance of these events was largely a fight against corruption. Of long-held and widespread frustration and disenchantment at corruption and abuse of power by the colonial government and European and Asian businesses organized as the Association of West African Merchants. The ex-soldiers were being dealt a very raw deal. At the commencement of the Second World War, the colonial government enticed them with promises of jobs and lucrative pensions after service in the army and participation in the war. So they were shipped off to fight in what is now Myanmar. Now, upon their return, and about 3 years after the end of the war, the colonial government had reneged, and it showed no inclination to make good the promises. Indeed, the governor, who had just assumed office 6 weeks prior to 28 February, totally misread the events of the day. He appeared to view the occurrences on 28 February as an unprovoked challenge to his authority, because he had assumed that the protests had been organized by local politicians. His reaction was then to imprison 6 of the prominent politicians. The ex-soldiers were not unique in their agitation. This is what the governor did not realize. The general population was highly disenchanted with its state of affairs. There had been widespread protests before 28 February against low wages, abusive working conditions, and undue hardship propelled by the insensitivity of the colonial government and the corrupt practices of the Association of West African Merchants, which included price fixation, price gouging, and conditional sales. The testimony collected by the Watson Commission showed that the association, which controlled the import and export market, was sometimes making as much as 75% profit on each commodity sold. Indeed, so pervasively corrupt were their activities that the acronym of the association, AWAM, became synonymous with unfair, corrupt, and fictitious practices and conduct. So when you're watching a movie and you go, oh, this is AWAM, you should know where it is coming from. This was our state as we stood on the brink of independence. We fought grand corruption perpetrated against us by foreigners. Maybe we inherently loathed corruption. I'm talking in the past tense. Maybe we engaged in that struggle because it directly affected our income levels and livelihoods. Of course, if someone is price gouging to 75% abnormal profit, you would rebound on it. Maybe it was both. The point is that we did fight. A good fight, it was too. 9 years later, we became independent. Then we took over our own affairs. And here we are. In politics and business, we became masters of our own destiny. What did we do? Need I tell you? We descended into the fray. Now we were in charge. Since then, we have been unable to put a secure lid on the cauldron of corruption, and our efforts appear to be disappearing acts. Indeed, as my brother Senor alluded to, every government we have had cited corruption in its predecessor government. It has been such a race to the bottom that the easy excuse of all the coup makers and plotters, successful and unsuccessful, has been to level corruption charges against those they overthrew or attempted to overthrow. On this score, I'm not taking the Coup Makers and Plotters Association to task. That is not why we are here today. We will revisit that another day. Today, I'm only saying there was indeed corruption at every turn and time. So they could easily mount an excuse on that mount to overthrow or attempt to overthrow a government. As a result, we have had about 50 corruption-related commissions of inquiry and 5 successful military coups in the name of fighting corruption. We are parties to several international treaties on corruption, including the UN Convention, which we ratified on 24 June 2007. We have passed several legislations designed to tackle corruption. We have redefined corruption and enhanced the punishment for corruption-related offenses from misdemeanors to second-degree felonies. We established the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice and the Serious Fraud Office, which we rechristened the Economic and Organized Crime Office. And we established the Financial Intelligence Center with the same intended purpose, though to a limited degree. And in 2014, we instituted the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, which recommended the establishment of an independent prosecution authority to effectively tackle corruption. You would recall that the prevailing thinking was that the Attorney General, being a member of cabinet and the chief legal advisor to the president, was not well suited to investigate and prosecute members of a government to which he belonged. And after decades of contemplation and experimentation, we created the Office of the Special Prosecutor, OSP, as a flagship anti-corruption institution with a unique fourfold mandate of investigating corruption and corruption-related cases, prosecuting suspected offenders, recovering and managing assets, and taking steps to prevent corruption. The advent of the OSP, once again you would recall, was forged in immense controversy. Let me take you back to the 2016 presidential elections. Corruption and corruption-related issues were rather topical during that campaign season, owing to the ever-present, unexplainable, and questionable acquisition of wealth in all sectors. The opposition candidate hopped on to the anti-corruption train with a bouquet of promises. He promised them to adopt the Anas method in fighting corruption, in reference to the style employed by Ghana's foremost investigative journalist, Anas Arimia Anas, of naming, shaming, and jailing. He also promised to create and establish a specialized independent agency to fight corruption. He christened it the Office of the Special Prosecutor. He won the election against the sitting president with a convincing margin. The campaign promise of the creation and establishment of a specialized independent anti-corruption agency was then seemingly fulfilled. So in December 2017, Ghana made its most decisive statement on the strife against corruption with the passage of the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act 2017, Act 959, which established the OSP. The act came into force on 2 January 2018. It was then followed by the enactment of 2 legislative instruments, the Office of the Special Prosecutor Regulations 2018 LI 2373 and the Office of the Special Prosecutor Operations Regulations LI 2374. Professor, whether fortuitously or by design, establishment of the OSP was in fulfillment of a treaty obligation. Ghana was required anyway, under Article 6 and Article 36 of the UN Convention Against Corruption, to establish an independent specialized authority to combat corruption through law enforcement. The intended design of the OSP was a cure of the inadequacies of the traditional anti-corruption regime characterized by the lack of real and enforcement powers. Hence, the OSP's multifaceted reach and outlook. Its independence by law was intended to be assured in the proper sense. I keep using the word intended. As the special prosecutor retains full authority and control over the investigation, initiation, prosecution, and conduct of cases. The OSP, unlike other institutions, is required to snoop around everywhere in whatever sector And its mandate does not rest only in respect of public officials. It extends also to politically exposed persons and private persons. The reach of the OSP goes beyond the borders of Ghana. In this sense, the OSP has a mandate to investigate and prosecute corruption and corruption-related offenses committed in Ghana or in a foreign country, so far as the act constitutes corruption or corruption-related offense in Ghana, and the act was committed by a national of Ghana or against a national of Ghana. So elegant, it seems on paper. So joyful it sounds to the ears of the anti-corruption campaigner until you go in. Beyond the seeming good feeling and the paper promises, never mind that the promises are written in a statute. Graveness stares. The very existence of the OSP is hemmed so tightly as if in a vice, in an attempt to scuttle it. It should perhaps not be surprising, as its creation itself was greeted with immense skepticism. And it was attended by argument against argument as to why it was needed at all. Will it not be a duplication of institutions? Will it be allowed to function properly? Do we even need it? The questions poured. In fairness, the questions themselves were not altogether problematic. After all, we must carefully examine the utility of the creation of institutions. However, the result was the creation of an institution with never before seen powers and mandate. Fine. Yet, with a plethora of half-hearted statutory provisions which effectively tie its hands behind it. Along come the death knells. Not infrequently, we hear calls, a lot of the time, from very high places, that the OSP should be scrapped and that it serves no useful purpose. If indeed that is what we want to do, then let us do so. On another score, there have been and there are attempts to discredit the office and its principal officers unfairly and unjustly, attended by formidable resistance and pushback. Often, the attacks on the office and its principal officers are mounted by persons who are at the short end of an investigation or prosecution and the associates of such persons. The effect of the existential challenge confronting the OSP is that though the nation collectively acknowledges that we must fight corruption, yet there is also a specter that the flagship agency designed, even if imperfectly, to fight corruption is not needed and should be disbanded, while others actively undermine it and its principal officers. This has translated into a rather curious cycle. First, the outburst of an outcry when the OSP acts, and an outcry when it is seen as not acting. It is as if we do not know what we want. The situation in Ghana now is, and I stated this earlier, we must fight corruption, but we must not fight corruption. That is our state now. It all depends on where we stand in respect of an investigation. Our collective behavior shows that we do not reward integrity, and we do not want to reward integrity. The bi-malady of corruption and state capture has every intention of staying with us unless we act. In their various manifestations, they inhibit our progress and dissipate our resources. We experience their debilitating effects all around us in their full force, and they are ingrained in our society much like rituals. Meritorious or otherwise rightfully deserving standards for the allocation of opportunities and resources are eluding us. The abuse of entrusted power for private gain is the currency. Misrepresentation of events and facts for pecuniary gain has never been this attractive. And then there's a sprint for the inordinate control of state institutions and the public decision-making process. State institutions are being neutralized as appendages of individuals and existing laws and the legal system are being weakened for private gain. Then, to further sink ourselves in our ill progress, we are flighting away and secreting our illicitly gorged up bounties to other jurisdictions to avoid detection and to evade recovery. And it seems to me that no one can put an actual price tag on the attendant social and economic cost of corruption and state capture. These are endemic in several sectors in the economy. A notorious suspect is the extractive industry. Offshore, we are confronted with the scourge of oil bunkering. On land, we are bedeviled with wanton destruction of protected forests and real property, and the mind-numbing pollution of our water bodies, all in the name of making wealth. Go ahead, get paid. We are standing at a single spot and spinning around slowly on one foot in a circle, much like a gyroscope. The conversation has become very sterile. The fight against corruption is proving to be an unruly bride indeed, I said some time ago. She is not lending herself to agreeable domestication and cohabitation. And we are not recording much success. Our progress is hampered, and we are unable to move the needle of development to any appreciable height. Our story is a cycle of self-defeat and disappearing acts. First, we begin by collectively acknowledging that we must fight corruption. That sort of lights a glimmer on the horizon that there is hope. Then we dim the glimmer by approaching the enterprise of the fight against corruption half-heartedly. That is to say, we appear to know the cure to the malaise, but we are unwilling to take the medication fully. It is as if we do not want to actually cure it. It's as if we want the disease, though we reckon it is slowly killing us. I dare say, it is quite a head scratcher. Citizens view anti-corruption law enforcement institutions as largely hemmed in by political marginalization, and thus part of the problem. This is because citizens perceive a high incidence of impunity among the elite, as they should, and that corruption investigations will invariably amount to nothing and yield no consequences. I do not blame them. Further, citizens view those in authority as a problem, and they are quick to condemn corrupt acts attendant upon official acts, as they should. Yet, citizens play a significant role in the problem through acts of open support for official corruption and sometimes participation in same. Given the Ghana Institution of Engineering lecture about 2 years ago, I said this, that on another score, not too infrequently, the public decries the state's longevity and quality of our infrastructure. Why do we not have the best infrastructure as they do in some places? The citizen ponders. Why are our roads so bad? The motorist asks. This stretch of road was constructed just 2 years ago. Why has it developed craters for potholes already? He quizzes further. Whoever designed this roundabout or intersection does certainly live on another planet, a bystanding observer muses. Whose idea was it to design and fit such a closed-up claustrophobic casket of an elevator in such a huge and busy public building? A visitor fumes. Whoever designed the approaches and accesses to this building is certainly not a friend of disabled persons. Another visitor contemplates. We hear like complaints daily. We see the sources of the frustration and grumbling all around us. Professor, we may attribute some of these defaults to the poverty question. After all, if we had a wherewithal, we could insist on the very best and will not have to sort of beat back on the designs and construction of projects. We may not be inclined to output and accept the not so very best in that regard. And so, we may link some of the sources of the public consternation to the maintenance question, the lack of it, I mean, which in itself is likely an offshoot of the poverty question. Or we may trace it to our collective attitudes. if I may ask. From where I sit as a special prosecutor, poverty notwithstanding, I place these ills firmly at the door of corruption and state capture. They beget our poverty, which further begets more corruption. It is a poverty trap. We have to spring out of it to meaningfully develop. Simply put, we have managed to build for ourselves a solid culture of illegal and unfair gain, and it is strangling us. Part 3. I'm bringing it down. Glimmer on the horizon. It is not all despair, though. There is a glimmer on the horizon. The constitutional review process presents us with a golden opportunity to change the narrative and to get things effectively and efficiently working. We should transform the Constitution by weaving anti-corruption concepts and institutions tightly into its outlook and reach. And I am so glad that the chairman of the Constitution Review Commission is my reviewer. Professor, this is directly to you and your team. And right thereupon, after doing that, we should build on that framework a robust and pragmatic wave of statutory detail to give firm effect to the constitutional provisions to render corrupt activities high risk and ultra costly and unattractive enterprises. To do this, 4 truisms must guide this exercise. First, it must be borne in mind that the law always appears to be a step behind criminal innovation. And as technological advancement ushers in marvels hitherto unknown, perpetrators of corruption devise sophisticated ways adapted to avoid detection. Second, it should occur to everyone here that truth is always the first casualty in any criminal inquiry. Those who engage in grand corruption are wealthy. They possess the means and the wherewithal to mount formidable campaigns of misinformation and truth distortion. They also pose a real and present danger to anti-corruption officials through intimidation, open threats, and actual harm, even to the point of killing. Third, corrupt activities are the most difficult to prove, as they are carried out in stealth, and the state of mind accompanying such acts are often unclear. Fourth, corruption prevention is preferable to after-the-fact models of fighting corruption. This is because it is more productive and cost-effective. Better to prevent the outbreak of a stitch than to seek to sow it after it ensues. Upon this foundation, we must situate the fight against corruption in a comprehensive philosophical context. The lecturer in me is coming out. By this, I mean that we should examine the regime from an introspective reflection. Are we doing this because we believe it is the right thing to do? And will it produce the best results or consequences? On this score, we have to conceptualize anti-corruption legal concepts in a fundamental manner. That is, a review of the historical, philosophical, linguistic, economic, social, and political implications of law. Only then will the anti-corruption quest have real meaning as being firmly secured by law. This is because what may work in other jurisdictions may spectacularly fail here, and what may amount to corruption in other parts of the world may not necessarily fit in our worldview. All I'm stating is this: we must link our laws empirically to the facts of our lives. This is because the development of law is not just a construct intended to guide human conduct. There is a larger objective of formulating law and viewing it essentially as a drive from its evolution to its future direction as a tool for social change. So, Professor, a great starting point should be the reckoning that gift giving is ritualistic in our society. It is always difficult to distinguish between the lawful and the unlawful when it comes to gift giving in Ghana. And so when a bystander lends a hand to assist you to lift the side of your vehicle that is hanging over a gutter, he expects you to show appreciation by giving him a token cash sum. Well, these days, the bystander will actually demand the cash and may probably verbally abuse you if it does not forthcome. It didn't used to be the case, but now that is it. Professor, as you are reviewing the Constitution, it should also occur to you that in some of our traditions, and as recognized by our courts, where a person is gifted valuable property by a donor during the lifetime of the donor, the donee is expected to present a symbolic gift as aseda in acceptance of the gift. Who does that? We do that in Ghana. It's perfectly acceptable and it's been blessed by the courts. Indeed, the absence of the symbolic gift in acceptance of the valuable property may, in some cases, render the gift ineffective and be subject to contention. If you were indeed gifted this by your grandfather during his lifetime, did you present aseda? Ritualistic gift giving. Then again, in some of our traditions, a notification of bereavement will be a wunu. You are notifying an important person and inviting that person to the impending funeral. Sometimes you are required, if you are smart enough, to accompany the notification of the bereavement and the invitation to this important person, schnapps, and a symbolic cash sum. This signifies several things. For instance, it may signify the premium you place on your departed relative. It may also signify that the person you are informing of the bereavement and inviting to the funeral is highly regarded by you and your family, as well as an indication of the funeral donation you expect from the invited person. So you give the snap, you put a cash sum on it, it is a notice to the person you are informing and inviting to the funeral. Do as I have done in multiples. This is our society. All I'm saying is that our society is one of promise for promise, gift for gift, give and take, and live and let live. This should guide our anti-corruption constructs, not what the white man tells us. Further, we must always be quick to realize that the world is run on self-interest as we formulate our laws. Each one of us sitting here silently reflects on the question of what is in it for me when you are engaged in whatever vocation or activity you find yourself in. It is the desire for self-preservation. It is natural. It is also the desire for self-enhancement. These drive our actions. Situate this in the craft of statehood. Often, the interests of the populace get lost in translation and are sacrificed, as opposed to the interests of the main actors whose opinions and actions dramatically shape the course of the state, whether for beauty or for debasement. There is always this old subtle trick in statehood. The main actors make believe that the good of the populace is so dear to them. They are always quick to tell and remind the populace that they have their best interests at heart. For the most part, this trick works, especially when the population is indoctrinated enough. Chinua Achebe summed this up so well in A Man of the People, a novel which he really captured happenings in society. Professor, I will attempt to illustrate my point with the biblical trial and execution of Jesus. Do not get me wrong. I am not trying to preach. I am the least qualified to. But 4 characters deserve mention as I bring things down. First, Judas. He has been vilified enough in history, and his name has gone down in infamy. Indeed, his name is a synonym for traitor. Maybe he deserved it. However, I see things differently. His actions tell me a very different story from what the Gospels portray him to be. I do not think he set out to betray Jesus at all. To me, he was just a con artist who set out to defraud the high priests and cash in a handsome amount. The man had been with Jesus for a considerable time, and he witnessed the spectacular miracles recounted in the Bible. He probably never at any moment thought that Jesus was amenable to capture. It was more probable than not that he thought Jesus would vanish and escape any attempt to capture him. Think about it this way. After all, Jesus had previously inexplicably escaped the throng of people who were desirous of throwing him over a cliff. He simply walked through and away from them, the Bible recounts. Therefore, in the estimation of Judas, Jesus would escape again, and he will get to keep his small fee just for revealing Jesus' whereabouts to the authorities. Just that, I will do. So his interest was very simple: getting paid, not betrayal. Next, the high priests. All in the context of statehood. Their interest was clear enough. Jesus was bad for their business. They were losing their audience to this upstart who was pulling crowds and claiming to be the Son of God. They feared that it was only a matter of time their synagogues would be emptied of the faithful and they would lose their perch as the very respected and influential spiritual leaders. So, better to contrive charges against him and have him taken away from the scene permanently. Now, let us call up Pilate. He was the governor of the Roman province of Judea at the time. The Gospels appear to portray him as a reluctant judge who pronounced the death sentence on Jesus. However, for a man whose contemporaries described him as prone to unnecessary violence and brutality, his dramatic public washing of his hands to signify a lack of responsibility for the killing of Jesus belied his real interest. It was simple. He was saving his own skin and ingratiating himself to his boss, Tiberius Caesar. This is because Judea was extremely volatile at the time and characterized by violent protests and unrest. Pilate's high handling of affairs had not gone unnoticed in Rome. Therefore, the Jesus trial and execution provided him with a wonderful opportunity to appease the people, one, and their leaders, two, and not to attract unpleasant sanctions from Rome, three. That is all it meant for him. Finally, the people, still in the context of statehood. What was their interest? Those who were screaming, "Crucify him, crucify him." It appears difficult to apprehend even to this day. Yet, they were still screaming and calling for the execution of the man and for the freeing of an accomplished criminal on top. In the scheme of affairs, consider it this way. Judas satisfied his interest, albeit with unintended disastrous consequences as his con game went seriously awry. Next, the interest of the high priest was very served. Jesus was permanently taken off the scene, and they regained their influence and respect among the people. Pilate also served his interest very well. Tiberius Caesar left him to his designs for a while. What about the people? My interest. It will appear that the trial and execution of Jesus served them no useful purpose. So the old statehood trick really worked well and served the main actors satisfactorily and left the people with nothing. Professor, this is my point. There is sound force in the reckoning that there is no objective way of doing things or attaining heights from an individual perspective. Consequently, societal interests must remain supreme. In the end, our collective good is worth the fight against corruption, and we must always guard against the tendency of personal interests overriding the common will. The mantra should be, our collective ailment, our collective solution. On the back of the foregoing, I call for the following, still directed at the professor. First, we must write the office of the special prosecutor into the Constitution and board it up firmly. Please do not dwell on me. Leave me out of the equation. I'm just one person, obviously. My tenure will end at some point, and like everyone else, I will leave the scene. I say so because my experience has been that the OSP is being increasingly equated to me. It is as if I'm the office, and the office is me. Sometimes it feels as if the fight against corruption is solely my concern. I dare say that personalized spotlighting is without any utility. So leave me out of the equation. The focus should be on building institutions that stand the test of time. From my experience, the OSP represents our best bet in fighting corruption. Its present attributes, mandate, powers, and reach afford it a pole position as the foremost and focal institution in tackling the problem. However, the OSP does need a lot of tweaking, though, to render it fully fit for purpose. Its independence must be fully assured, and its powers and mandate should be enlarged and enhanced. The job is daunting. We must be fully kitted for it. Therefore, the quest should be an entrenchment of the fight against corruption in the Constitution, a retrofitting and full equipment and insulation of the foremost anti-corruption law enforcement institution from political marginalization and reprisals. Second, we've gone over this, it's become an overbeaten path, but we need it. We must enact a comprehensive Corrupt Practices Act to frontally address all forms of corruption and corruption-related activities. This will afford us the opportunity to clearly and concisely set out what we mean by corruption and corruption-related offenses. The present formulation under Section 79 of Act 959 is unhelpful and circuitous. It engenders confusion. It is symptomatic of our penchant for crafting criminal legislation in a very arcane and runabout fashion instead of simply stating what we mean to say, which then festers decades of debate as to what act, if at all, has been criminalized. Let me share an example. In Section 104 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29, instead of simply stating and describing the sexual acts we were prohibiting, we chose to say that we were prohibiting unnatural carnal knowledge. We then proceeded to define unnatural carnal knowledge in the most unhelpful manner by stating that unnatural carnal knowledge is sexual intercourse with a person in an unnatural manner or with an animal. Sexual intercourse with an animal is straightforward. However, what does it mean to say sexual intercourse with a person in an unnatural manner? So it requires you to know what sexual intercourse in a natural manner is. Breaking news. We did not define sexual intercourse in a natural manner. Go figure it out yourself. You should be able to. Don't ask me. I don't know. But that is what we do to ourselves. Why adopt such a formulation when we can simply describe the act? Similar thing we have done with the definition of corruption and corruption-related offenses. Even me, a special prosecutor, I don't know. It's confusing. Because you have to go about and figure and tear things out just to decipher what this code means. We selected 10 sections from Act 29 and one subsection from the Public Procurement Act. Then it seems when we did that, we got tired because we then proceeded to throw in a blanket provision, my quote is coming, which refers to existent offenses under enactments arising out of or consequent to offenses to the selected offenses. This is what you have as corruption and corruption-related offenses. What does it mean? Don't ask me. We're still trying to figure it out. This is inelegant and unclear. It's unhelpful. We are stultifying ourselves with these preventable shortcomings in our formulation of laws and the legal fictions we employ to prop up legal principles in a seemingly unsuccessful attempt to give them a semblance of validity. We will do ourselves a world of good if we state out clearly and in simple terms the acts and conduct we are prohibiting. On this score, We must forcefully address unexplained wealth, not only among public officers, but also private persons with biting lifestyle auditing. Then again, we must highlight the vexed question of the opacity attending political party financing and the monetization of public elections. This will surely change the narrative. Third, we must set up specialized anti-corruption courts, manned by especially trained judges in the field to swiftly and efficiently deal with corruption cases. Related to this, we must, in practice, not just as written in the Constitution, assure the independence of the judiciary and fortify in it a culture of the defense of truth and the reward of integrity. Justice, fundamental to any thriving society, cannot flourish in the context of corruption. The scales of justice should remain untainted if the fight against corruption is to attain any notable result. Professor, corruption itself is curtailed through justice, and the absence of justice begets corruption. It is much like light and darkness. The brighter justice shines, the dimmer corruption gets. On this score, I also call for the establishment in our schools, at the basic and secondary levels, curricula in anti-corruption studies intended at instilling an unyielding commitment to combating corruption at every level. All I have said can be summed up in just a sentence. We must channel our anti-corruption laws as a construct for national development. End credits. More good men needed. Now we are back from the flashback. I already told you my conclusion right at the outset, and I said I was going to work my way back to the conclusion. So now we are back from the flashback. Permit me to restate my purpose. I call for constitutional reformation and a reimagination of our collective mindsets to meaningfully tackle down corruption and state capture in aid of national development. 4, it is upon the fight against corruption that we may forge ourselves decent existence. Perhaps I know how to assure my own integrity, but I do not know how to assure personal integrity in others beyond a plea to good sense, a plea to morality, and a plea to fairness. And this is all I have tried to do in this address. A lot more good men should join the fight. The nation needs you. Esum ye druyen. Thank you.